Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is February 12, 2026.
And if you are feeling a sense of vertigo today, you are not alone. We are looking at a day that historians might circle in red ink for decades to come.
It really does feel heavy, doesn't it? I mean, usually we have one big story dominating the cycle, an election result, a natural disaster. But today, it feels like the floor is dropping out from under us on multiple fronts, all at once.
It's all at once. And that's the thing. It feels disjointed, but it isn't. It's connected.
That's what I was feeling.
And that's the scary part.
Yeah.
It isn't just about, a diplomatic meeting over here or a scandalous hearing over there. In a vacuum, it is the convergence of two massive, destabilizing events happening at the exact same moment.
Okay, lay them out for us.
On one side of the world, we're staring down the barrel of a potential kinetic war with Iran. A conflict that some analysts, and these are serious people, believe could end the American empire's naval dominance overnight.
Kinetic is such a polite way of putting it. We're talking about shooting. We're talking about active combat.
We are talking about missiles in the air. We are talking about carrier sinking. It's the real thing. But then, right here on the home front, you have the internal rot being exposed by the release of 3 million pages of Epstein documents.
3 million. The sheer volume is staggering.
It is. And let's be absolutely clear, this isn't just about the sordid details of a sex ring anymore. That is the tabloid version. The reality these documents expose is much, much darker. They are rewriting the history of Silicon Valley, the origins of our advanced computing systems, and, frankly, the moral bankruptcy of the technological elite that runs our lives.
So if we had to pin down a single thesis for this deep dive, what are we actually looking at? What's the thread connecting these two crises?
We are looking at the simultaneous overextension of U.S. military power abroad and the exposure of a deep structural corruption at home. It is a perfect storm. The empire is stretching its muscles overseas, just as its moral and structural skeleton is crumbling from the inside out.
Okay, that puts it into a terrifying perspective. We have a massive amount of ground to cover today. So let's give everyone a roadmap. We're going to start with the immediate threat, what's being called the Second Armada, and this high-stakes summit happening right now between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Then we're going to pivot to what our sources are calling the Midnight Hammer legacy and the really terrifying reality of Iran's hypersonic capabilities. This is stuff that isn't making it to the nightly news because it's either too technical or maybe just too frightening for the average broadcast.
After that, we have to turn to Washington. We'll break down the Pam Bondi hearings and the forensic analysis of specific code words found in those Epstein files. These are the details that turn conspiracy theories into documented fact.
And then we have a masterclass segment that, and I'm not exaggerating, it completely blew my mind when I went through the source material, the untold history connecting Jeffrey Epstein, DARPA, and the birth of Facebook.
It's an incredible story. And finally, we'll do a rapid-fire look at the other global flashpoints, Russia, China, and a truly bizarre plot regarding Cuba before we finish with a look at a new resistance movement called Resist and Unsubscribe.
It's a packed agenda, no question.
It is. So let's jump right into the war room. The breaking news today, and we're citing reports from Rachel Blevins and Barak Ravid, is that President Trump has now threatened to send a second aircraft carrier strike group to the Middle East.
A second one. And context is absolutely key here. It is February 12, 2026.
Yeah.
Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C. as we speak. This is, his 6th or 7th visit since October 7th?
I believe it's the 7th. And the rhetoric is it's heating up so fast. We have a specific quote from Trump's interview with Axios that everyone is parsing right now. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Last time Iran decided that they were better off not making a deal and they were hit with the midnight hammer."
The midnight hammer. That is a very specific, very aggressive phrase. It's not just we struck them. It had a sense of finality, of overwhelming force.
It does. And he went on to say that he wants a nuclear deal, but Netanyahu, who was in the room with him, is pushing for something much more aggressive, a total dismantling of Iran's entire ballistic missile program.
And this is where the strategic disconnect really lies.
Yeah.
We need to look at the analysis from Professor Jeffrey Sachs on this. There is a fundamental friction between these two leaders that the media often glosses over by just calling them allies.
They paint it as a unified front.
Exactly. But it's not. Netanyahu's goal, according to Sachs, has been incredibly consistent for decades. He wants to drag the United States into a war to physically destroy the Iranian regime. He knows, and has always known, that Israel cannot do the heavy lifting alone against a nation the size and complexity of Iran. He needs the U.S. military. He needs American assets.
Okay, so that's Netanyahu's position. It's clear. Where does Trump fit into that calculus? Does he want the same thing?
No, and that's the critical point. Trump believes in the art of the deal, right? He still believes in it. He thinks he can bully Iran into a submission deal using the mere threat of force. He thinks if he just parks enough carriers off their coast, waves the big stick, Tehran will fold and give him the deal he wants.
But he's basing that strategy on his own narrative of past success.
He's operating on a narrative that might be completely false. He claims Midnight Hammer, referencing previous strikes, was a huge success that weakened Iran. But if you look at the reality on the ground, what do you see? Iran's proxies are still active across the region. Their missile capabilities are not just intact. They're demonstrably more advanced than they were before those strikes.
So his premise is flawed from the start.
It seems to be. He thinks he won the last round, while all the evidence suggests Iran just took the hit, learned from it, and got stronger.
That brings us directly to the 12-day war context. We keep hearing this term referenced in the sources, but it's often misunderstood. Scott Ritter provided some really intense analysis on this. The mainstream narrative, specifically what you'd hear on an outlet like Fox News, has been that during this previous engagement, Iran was, quote, defenseless.
Right. The prevailing wisdom in the West was that the U.S. and Israel achieved total air dominance. They thought they had blinded the Iranian radar network with electronic warfare and could essentially fly wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted.
A total mismatch.
That was the story. But Ritter argues that that is historically inaccurate. He points out that Iran preserved its forces. They didn't just leave their best assets out on the tarmac to be bombed. They moved them, they hid them, and more importantly, they launched successful counteroffensive that the West has just sort of ignored.
And there was a technical detail Ritter mentioned that really caught my attention, and I want to dig into this because it contradicts everything we think we know about air superiority. He talked about Iran's use of F-4 Phantoms. Now, to me, and probably to many people listening, an F-4 sounds like a museum piece. That's a Vietnam-era jet. My grandfather flew those. How is that a threat to a modern Air Force?
It's an old airframe, yes. On paper, it looks like a relic. But this is where modern warfare gets really tricky, and you can't just count the number of planes. You can have an old chassis, an old body, but if you retrofit it with modern sensors, modern avionics, and crucially, you integrate it into a modern data network, it becomes a real threat again.
So it's not the plane itself, it's the network it's plugged into.
Exactly. It's about the data it's receiving. Ritter notes that these F-4s are operating alongside Russian-supplied Su-35s, or potentially Su-27s and MiG-29s that have been upgraded with advanced Russian avionics. They're all talking to each other and to ground-based radar that might be more resilient than we think.
And what was the result of this integration during that 12-day war?
The result, and this is the key detail, is that Iranian aircraft were effectively getting radar locks on Israeli aircraft.
Let's explain what that means for a pilot, because that's not just seeing them on a screen.
No, it's a world of difference. When a pilot gets locked, their entire cockpit warning system lights up like a Christmas tree. It's screaming at them that a missile is about to fire, or even worse, is already in the air, tracking them. It's not a passive search radar anymore. It is an active fire control solution painted on your aircraft.
And when that happens, what do you do?
You cannot continue your bombing run. It's over. You have to go defensive, instantly. Your only job is to break the lock. You're popping flares, dropping chaff, diving, turning, doing anything you can to make that missile miss. You have to retreat.
So even if they didn't shoot down a huge number of jets, the fact that they could lock onto them forced the Israeli Air Force to abort their missions.
Precisely. It denies airspace. It makes the mission impossible. So this whole idea, this foundational belief in Washington and Tel Aviv that the U.S. or Israel can just stroll into Iranian airspace with impunity. According to Ritter's analysis, that is a dangerous, potentially fatal myth.
And if we go into a new conflict believing that myth,
pilots are going to die. A lot of them.
So, if the air war isn't the slam dunk that Trump's rhetoric implies, let's talk about the naval situation. Because he's talking about sending this second carrier group like it's the ultimate checkmate piece. It's the big stick. But is it? Is it still the biggest stick?
This is the military reality check, and honestly, this is the most terrifying part of today's deep dive. We have to look at the vulnerability of these aircraft carriers. Scott Ritter and Danny Haifong have been sounding the alarm on this for a while, and the math it's deeply unsettling.
Ritter's assessment of the U.S. bases in the region in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, It was pretty bleak to start with, even before we get to the ships.
It was. He argues the U.S. simply lacks sufficient air defense to protect them. We are talking about Patriot batteries and Test-Iad systems. The public perception, I think, is that these systems are a kind of iron dome that stops everything that comes their way.
That's certainly how they're marketed.
But the data, especially the data coming out of Ukraine, suggests they simply aren't effective enough against the sheer volume and sophistication of modern missiles. We have seen Patriots fail against Russian hypersonic technology. And we know for a fact that Iran has been sharing notes with Russia and vice versa. They've learned what works and what doesn't.
Okay, so the land bases are vulnerable. What about the carriers at sea? They're mobile, they have their own defenses.
They are, but that brings us to the nightmare scenario.
The USS Abraham Lincoln.
The Lincoln is currently in the region. If Trump sends a second carrier, you now have two massive $10 billion floating targets, each with 5,000 souls on board. The nightmare is this. Iran has hypersonic missiles. They have sophisticated drone swarms. If they manage to coordinate an attack and sink a U.S. aircraft carrier, something that hasn't happened since World War II, what happens next?
Well, according to the doctrine, this is a red...
It's more than a red line. According to stated U.S. nuclear doctrine, the destruction of a carrier strike group is considered a strategic defeat of such magnitude that it warrants a nuclear response.
That is... Let's just pause on that for a second. We are saying that the loss of a ship, granted, a massive ship with thousands of sailors, triggers a nuclear launch.
That is the established escalation ladder. It is, and I don't use this term lightly, the suicide pill of American foreign policy. We are risking global nuclear war over a legacy naval asset that might be, and this is the hard part to accept, obsolete in the age of hypersonic missiles.
We're playing a game of chicken where the cost of losing is the end of the world.
That's what it is. It's the ultimate bluff, and Iran may be in a position to call it.
You used the word obsolete. Let's dig into why a carrier might be obsolete. You mentioned Iran has solved the drone swarm problem. How have they done that?
Yes. Citing the analysis of Danny Haiphong, Iran has developed a network of underground cities. And we're not talking about simple bunkers. We're talking about massive subterranean complexes buried so deep in mountains that they are incredibly hard to hit with conventional bunker busters.
And what's in these cities?
They aren't just storing missiles there. They are manufacturing them and launching them from protected, hardened positions. The scale is what's terrifying. They can reportedly launch thousands of missiles and drones per day.
Thousands per day.
Yes, the claim, thousands. And here's the kicker, the part that really changes the game. Russian assistance. Reports from multiple intelligence sources indicate Russia is helping Iran jam Starlink signals.
Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite internet service.
Exactly. Think back to the early days of the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians used Starlink brilliantly for drone coordination, for communication, for command and control. It was their lifeline.
Right. It was a huge advantage.
It was. Russia struggled with it at first, but they are very good at electronic warfare. They eventually figured out the electronic signatures and the methods to jam it effectively. Now, Iran has that technology. Plus, they're getting advanced avionics and targeting data from Russia. So you have a U.S. Armada sailing into a zone where their GPS might be jammed, their satellite communications might be degraded, and they are facing a swarm of thousands of drones and hypersonic missiles they can't easily track.
And what about our interceptors, the missiles we use to shoot down their missiles?
It comes down to simple, brutal math. We have a limited stock. A carrier group carries a finite amount of interceptors, SM-2s, SM-6s. These things are technological marvels, but they are incredibly expensive, millions of dollars apiece.
So it's an economic mismatch from the start.
It's a losing economic war, absolutely. If Iran fires a drone that costs, say, $20,000 and we fire a $2 million missile to stop it, we lose that exchange badly. But worse than that is the inventory problem. If they fire 1,000 drones and we only have 500 interceptors on the ships, the math is simple. 500 get through, and it only takes a few to cripple or sink a carrier.
It sounds like the U.S. military is, in this specific scenario, walking into a trap that has been very carefully laid.
It looks like a classic case of imperial overextension. We are projecting power using 20th century assets against a 21st century threat. We are assuming a superiority that we might not actually have the logistics to back up.
And meanwhile, while these carriers are sailing into this potential trap, what is happening on the diplomatic front? You mentioned Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are involved.
And this is what Scott Ritter has called the diplomatic sham. On the surface, Kushner and Witkoff are the negotiators. They're the ones ostensibly trying to cut a deal to avoid this war.
The peace track.
the supposed peace track. But Ritter points out that while they are publicly negotiating with the Iranian government, they are simultaneously meeting with Iranian opposition figures.
Wait, hold on. They are meeting with the very people who want to overthrow the government that they are currently negotiating with.
Exactly. They are planning regime change on the side. So if you are the Iranian leadership and you know this is happening, how can you possibly trust any deal that's being offered? The guy across the table is shaking your hand while plotting your overthrow in his spare time. It completely undermines the entire premise of diplomacy.
It suggests the goal isn't a deal at all. The goal is to be seen trying.
Precisely. It's a pretext.
Yeah.
It allows the administration to go to the American people and the world and say, we tried diplomacy, they were unreasonable, right before the shooting starts.
Okay, that is the international ledge we are all standing on. It is incredibly precarious. Now, I want to pivot, because we have to the domestic firestorm. In some ways, what's happening in Washington is just as explosive and just as destabilizing. We are talking, of course, about the Epstein files.
3 million pages. It's an avalanche of data, and no one has fully processed it yet.
3 million. And we are seeing the immediate fallout in real time with Attorney General Pam Bondi. She is being absolutely grilled on Capitol Hill. Tara Palmieri had some incredible reporting on this.
The scene that was described was just so striking. You have Bondi sitting at the witness table facing these aggressive questions from lawmakers, and standing silently behind her are survivors, victims of this network dressed entirely in white.
A powerful, silent protest. It's pure political theater, but in the most serious way. What was the specific grievance they're leveling against her?
The primary charge from Democrats is gross mismanagement of the document release. The Department of Justice, under her leadership, redacted the names of powerful associates, the billionaires, the politicians, the people with real clout whose names appear in the logs and emails. But in many cases, they left the names of the victims, the Jane Does, completely exposed.
That is horrific. So the victims get doxxed and the alleged perpetrators get their privacy protected.
It's a double victimization. It's the system protecting the powerful and exposing the vulnerable all over again. It reinforces the very power dynamic that allowed this abuse to happen for decades in the first place.
Now, we need to get into the weeds of these files because for a long time, people talked about code words in these emails, and it was widely dismissed by the mainstream press as conspiracy theory. It was lumped in with Pizzagate nonsense.
It was treated as a fringe delusion.
Exactly. But now we have forensic analysis from an expert, a Dr. G, which was referenced in the Mario Nawfal source material. And this analysis is making it very difficult to keep dismissing it.
This is where it gets very hard to look away. We have to look at the hard evidence of the language being used. Forensic linguistics is a real science. You're not just guessing. You look at context, at frequency, at anomaly. You look for things that don't make sense.
Let's start with one of the most cited examples.
Yeah.
The email discussing pizza and grape soda.
Right. On the surface, that sounds completely innocuous. Lots of people eat pizza. But the context in the emails makes absolutely no culinary or logical sense. There's one specific email where these grown men are discussing a photograph. One of them comments that the subject in the photo is, and I'm quoting here, radiating a soft glow. That's the pizza.
That's the pizza. People don't talk like that.
No. You don't describe a person's aura and attribute it to a slice of pepperoni. It's bizarre language. It's an anomaly that a forensic linguist would immediately flag as suspicious.
Okay, that's weird. But the beef jerky email, this one really stuck out to me because of the specific logistical details they discuss.
This is the kind of thing that becomes a smoking gun for forensic linguists. There are a series of emails where they are demanding that beef jerky be transported, but the instructions are just. They're completely illogical for actual beef jerky.
What were the instructions?
They demand to be transported in cold insulated bags, but, and this is the really weird part, they specifically say without crazy amounts of ice.
Okay, I go camping. I eat beef jerky. The entire point of jerky is that it is dried, cured meat. You throw it in a backpack. It lasts for months. It is the definition of a non-perishable food. You do not need a cold, insulated bag.
Exactly. Not only do you not need it, but if you put it on ice, the condensation would ruin it. You'd make it soggy. So the instructions are the opposite of what you would do for real beef jerky.
So the question is, if beef jerky isn't dried meat, what is it? And why does it need to be kept cool but not frozen?
The implication, according to Dr. G's analysis, and this is supported by the reporting from Liz Kronken over at Redacted News, is that these are not food items. Beef jerky, pizza, muffin, walnut sauce. These are code words for trafficking victims, likely children.
The casual nature of it is what's so chilling.
It's stomach-churning. They're discussing the logistics of transporting what are allegedly human beings with the same detached, bored tone you'd use for ordering office supplies. It implies a vast, normalized, almost corporate network of abuse.
And Liz Crocken's argument is that this forensic evidence vindicates the early independent reporting on Pizzagate that was so widely mocked.
She does. Her claim is that the source material now proves that the code words were real all along. And the media outlets that dismissed it all as fake news were, whether they knew it or not, essentially running cover for this network.
There's also a complex political angle here involving President Trump himself. Kim Iverson raised a really interesting question in her analysis. There's a debate happening right now. Did Trump release these files, or allow them to be released, to rat out Epstein and his network to save himself? Or is he deeply implicated?
It's a high-stakes gamble either way. Trump has tried to position himself as the champion of transparency, the one who is finally draining the swamp. But there is specific tension regarding his own Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. There are allegations in some of these files tying Lutnick not just to Epstein, but potentially to Mossad.
So Trump might be using the files as a weapon to purge his own administration of people he sees as liabilities. Or is he losing control of the narrative and the files are implicating people he wants to protect?
That is the open question in Washington right now. But what is absolutely clear is that this scandal goes far beyond just perverts having a party on an island. This touches the core machinery of the U.S. government, of Wall Street, and, as we're about to see, of the entire tech industry.
Which leads us perfectly into our masterclass segment. Because if you think Jeffrey Epstein was just a sex trafficker, you are missing the much bigger, much darker picture.
This is the revelation from the source material that really changes how you see the last 20 years of history. We are drawing heavily from the investigation by attorney Ron Chapman. His thesis is blunt and shocking. The Epstein scandal is not just about sex, it is about the new eugenics and the very foundation of modern machine intelligence.
Calling Epstein the godfather of this technology, that sounds like a stretch. It sounds like hyperbole until you look at the guest list for his events.
Exactly. Let's go back in time to 2002. There was a symposium held at Little St. James Epstein's now infamous island.
Who was there?
It wasn't just socialites and politicians. We were talking about Marvin Minsky from MIT, the absolute father of the field of artificial intelligence. We were talking about Ken Ford from NASA and DARPA, top-tier computer scientists, cognitive scientists, physicists. These are the people who literally built the digital world that we all live in.
And what was the stated mission of this meeting of scientific giants on a private island owned by a sex offender?
They were there to solve the common sense problem in cognitive computing. Basically, at that time, these advanced systems were very good at narrow tasks, at pattern recognition, telling a cat from a dog in a photo.
Yeah.
But they couldn't reason. They had no intuition, no common sense. They were trying to figure out how to bridge that gap to create something more like a human mind.
Okay, so Epstein is funding the foundational research that leads to the powerful systems we have today. But there is a DARPA connection that Ron Chapman maps out, and the timeline is, it's more than suspicious.
Suspicious is an understatement. It's almost too perfect to be a coincidence. You have to look at the dates. In 2003, DARPA, the Pentagon's research arm, launched a program called LifeLog.
LifeLog. I remember reading about this. It was incredibly controversial.
Massively controversial. The stated goal of LifeLog was to create a single, massive database of every American's entire life. Where you go, what you buy, who you talk to, every email you send, every book you read, total information awareness. They wanted to digitize the human experience to get the data they needed to train their machine learning systems.
Naturally, people hated that idea. It sounds like something straight out of Orwell's 1984.
It does. The public outcry was huge. The ACLU, civil libertarians from the left and the right, they all went crazy. So on February 4, 2004, the Pentagon issued a short press release announcing they were canceling the LifeLog program. They shut it down.
February 4, 2004. Okay, why does that date sound so familiar?
Because on that exact same day, February 4, 2004, a Harvard student named Mark Zuckerberg launched a website called the Facebook from his dorm room.
You cannot make this stuff up. LifeLog, the government surveillance program, dies in the morning, and Facebook, the private surveillance platform, is born in the afternoon.
On the very same day. And what did Facebook do? It essentially fulfilled the exact same mission as LifeLog. People wouldn't give their data to the Pentagon, but they would happily give it voluntarily to a cool social network. They uploaded their photos, their friend lists, their relationships, their political beliefs, their every thought. They built the database that DARPA wanted, and they did it for free.
And Chapman connects this to Peter Thiel, doesn't he?
Yes. Peter Thiel was the angel investor who gave Zuckerberg his first $500,000 to keep Facebook afloat in those critical early days. Thiel, of course, is the co-founder of Palantir, a data mining company whose entire business model requires massive data sets to function for its intelligence and defense contracts. The connections are just. They're right there in plain sight.
So the argument here is that Epstein, Thiel, and these DARPA-adjacent figures weren't just building a surveillance apparatus for the sake of spying. There was a philosophy behind it.
It's so much more than just surveillance. It's about social engineering. And this brings us back to Epstein's core ideology. Chapman calls it the new eugenics.
This is the transhumanism angle, the reports about him wanting to seed the human race with his DNA.
Correct. Epstein was obsessed with this idea. He wanted to freeze his sperm. He surrounded himself with prominent scientists like Martin Nowak at Harvard. Together, they ran something called the PED Laboratory, which stood for the Program for Evolutionary Dynamics.
That acronym, PED, that can't be a coincidence.
It is, to say the least, an unfortunate acronym. But the philosophy coming out of that lab was that human society should be viewed as a single biological organism. And just like a body, it has cancerous elements, people, ideas, or traits that are non-useful or detrimental to the whole.
And what do you do with cancer in an organism?
You starve it out, you isolate it, you cut it out. Epstein and Nowak and their circle viewed the masses as raw material to be managed and guided. Chapman argues this exact philosophy underpins the algorithmic manipulation that we see on social media every single day.
How so? Connect those dots.
Think about how Cambridge Analytica work. Think about how your own social media feed functions. It's designed to trigger what psychologists call System 1 thinking.
System 1, explain that.
It's a concept from behavioral psychology. System 1 is your fast, instinctive, and emotional brain. It's fear. It's reaction, it's impulse, it's your gut feeling. And it completely bypasses System 2, which is your slow, logical, and calculating brain.
So the algorithm is designed to keep us in that reactive, emotional state.
Constantly. The goal of these systems is to keep the herd in a state of perpetual, reactive System 1 thinking, angry, scared, tribal, so they can be more easily herded and controlled. Meanwhile, the elite, the superior genetic stock in Epstein's disturbing worldview, can operate using cool, detached System 2 logic to direct the future.
It is utterly terrifying. It connects the sexual abuse, the financial crimes, and the tech tyranny into one cohesive, ugly worldview. It's not just random villainy, it's a coherent philosophy of control.
And it helps explain why Epstein was so protected for so long. He wasn't just a pimp. He was a research and development arm for the surveillance state and the future of cognitive computing. He was too big to fail because he was helping build the very cage we all live in now.
Wow. Okay, we need to take a breath after that. That is a lot to process. But we can't stop there, because while this rot is being exposed at home, the rest of the world is also on fire. Let's do a quick run through the other major global flashpoints.
Let's start with Russia. Alexander Mercouris is reporting what he believes is an imminent massive strike against Ukraine.
We're seeing the open source reports of strategic bombers assembling.
That's right, Tu-95s, Tu-160s, and the deployment of hypersonic Kinzhal and Zircon missiles. These are the same unstoppable missile systems we were talking about in the context of Iran, the kind that modern air defenses struggle to intercept.
Why now? Why this dramatic escalation at this specific moment?
Professor Sachs argues it's a direct result of diplomatic failure. There were apparently agreements made in Anchorage back-channel talks between the U.S. and Russia, but the Trump administration, true to form, has been inconsistent. They failed to honor the terms regarding security guarantees, and from Russia's perspective, diplomacy is now dead. They're pursuing total military victory to secure their interests before the West can regroup or rearm Ukraine further.
Okay, so that's the Eastern Front. Moving to China, Cyrus Jansen has a staggering figure for us today.
$1 trillion. That is China's new trade surplus. It is a historic, mind-boggling threshold.
What does that number actually mean for the global order? $1 trillion is hard to even comprehend.
It means that while the U.S. is bogged down in the Middle East, spending blood and treasure and dealing with these deep internal scandals, China has effectively become the factory and the banker for the entire global South. Nation after nation is pivoting away from the dollar and the U.S. trade sphere because China is offering stability and, more importantly, actual goods. They are building bridges, ports, and high-speed rail, while we are building aircraft carriers we can't seem to defend.
And then there is this absolutely bizarre story about Cuba. Citing the reporting from Breaking Points, we have reports of a very strange regime change plot.
This is a classic, almost comical example of how disinformation can shape real-world policy. The story is that President Trump is claiming high-level negotiations are happening with the Cuban government. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio is allegedly feeding Trump false intelligence to set up a deliberate failure.
Why would he do that?
Because Rubio wants to be able to turn around and say, look, we tried diplomacy, it didn't work, now we have no choice but to pursue regime change. It manufactures the crisis he wants.
But the twist is where this high-level intelligence actually came from.
Right. There were these dramatic reports of Raul Castro's son meeting with the CIA in Mexico. Breaking Points did a deep dive and traced the source of this story. It wasn't CIA intel. It wasn't a cable from an embassy. It wasn't satellite imagery. It was, and I love this term, Facebook slop.
Facebook slop?
A random post by some guy in Spain. That post got picked up by a dissident blog in Miami, which then got cited by Politico as chatter. And from there, it was suddenly being briefed in the Oval Office as actionable intelligence.
So U.S. foreign policy towards a neighboring country is being driven by internet rumors.
It appears so. Which brings us right back to our central theme of fragility. We have nuclear weapons being aimed. We have carriers being deployed based on intel that might be as reliable as a chain email from your uncle in 2005.
Okay, we have painted a pretty bleak picture here. War, mass surveillance, government incompetence, eugenics. Is there any way out? We did find a fascinating segment from the Daily Beast featuring Scott Galloway.
Yes. Scott Galloway suggests a strategy he calls resist and unsubscribe.
It's surprisingly practical. Usually when people talk about resistance, it means marching in the street with a sign.
And Galloway's point is that protests in the street don't move the needle for a leader like Trump. He doesn't care about moral shaming or public opinion polls. He cares about one metric and one metric only. The S&P 500. The stock market.
So hit them where it hurts, the soft tissue, as the source called it.
Exactly. Galloway's plan is a form of economic warfare waged by the citizenry. He is urging people to methodically unsubscribe from the big tech services that form the backbone of the market. Cancel your ChatGPT subscription. Cancel Amazon Prime. Stop feeding the beast that is, in turn, feeding this system.
And the logic behind that is that these handful of tech giants make up something like 40% of the S&P 500's total market cap.
That's right. These companies trade at astronomical multiples based on one thing: projected user growth. If their subscriber numbers suddenly flatten or even drop by a few percentage points, the algorithm that values their stock panics. Their stock price tanks. If the tech sector tanks, the S&P 500 drops. And if the S&P 500 drops, Trump panics. It is a way to leverage the only thing the oligarchy truly cares about, their wealth, against them.
Resist and unsubscribe. It's a catchy phrase. And it feels like it brings the power back to the individual in a way that, say, voting doesn't always seem to anymore. It turns us from passive users back into active customers with real leverage.
It's asymmetric warfare for the average citizen. You don't need a weapon. You just need to close your wallet.
So as we wrap up this very intense deep dive, what is the big takeaway here? How do we synthesize the carriers in the Gulf, the code words in the Epstein files, and the origins of our intelligence systems?
The singular truth, the one thread that runs through everything we've talked about today, is fragility. We look at a U.S. aircraft carrier, and we're conditioned to see invincible power. But in the face of 21st century missiles, it might just be a $10 billion sitting duck. We look at the tech giants, and we see all-knowing gods. But they are built on a foundation of mass surveillance and a bizarre eugenicist philosophy funded by a pedophile ring. And we look at our political leadership, and we see chaos driven by internet rumors and unrestrained ego.
The illusion of competence is breaking.
It is. The systems are fragile. And once you see that fragility, once you really understand it, you realize that the future is not set in stone. It is dangerous, yes, but it is also malleable. The monsters that run our world aren't nearly as strong as they pretend to be.
A sobering but necessary perspective. If you found this analysis valuable, if it helped connect some dots that the mainstream news is missing, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like.
It really helps more than you know.
Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.
Goodbye.